Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Friday, June 11th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Minnesota game is in 83 days, the game against Michigan in 169 days. Our season preview series continues today with the second half of our look at the Oregon Ducks and specifically their defense. I think there are probably a lot of people who have not been paying super close attention to Oregon recently who still think they're like running the Chip Kelly blur offense and going for two after the first touchdown every week and not playing a single lick of defense. That is definitely not true any longer. Mario Cristobal has upgraded the talent across the defense, especially in the trenches. And Oregon is not a pushover on that side of the ball anymore, for sure. My guest today is James Crepea. He is the Ducks beat writer for the Oregonian, the host of the James Crepea Show on Fox Sports Eugene. This is the second half of our conversation about the Ducks. If you missed yesterday's show on the offense, definitely go back and check that one out as well. But now, here's our conversation about the Oregon defense. You got a change at coordinator, Andy Avalos, who is the defensive coordinator, now the head coach at Boise State. So how different are things going to look on that side of the ball this year? Or is it just kind of like keep on keeping on and pretty much continuity in terms of what they're going to try and do on that side of the ball?
There will be some changes from what we saw in the spring, where we got to see just a couple of scrimmages, the spring game and the first scrimmage a couple of weeks earlier. Hard to overanalyze because obviously things are pretty vanilla. But in terms of personnel package-wise, Andy Avalos was quite multiple, but they were more – he would tell you that he's a base 3-4 guy, but they were really running almost more 4-3 than a true 3-4 over the past 2 years. They were running a lot of 4-3. Whether the end was upright or not, they were really running a four-man front a lot. So far from what we've seen from Tim DeRuyter, and yes, he comes from Cal, where he served with Justin Wilcox for a few years, but it was Wilcox's defense, and DeRuyter's defense. If you really want to get to what his defense is, he talked about during his introductory press conference going back to his days at Texas A&M when he was the coordinator. Yeah, he was the head coach previously at Fresno State, and obviously he oversaw the defense. And his D coordinator at the time was a guy who played for him and worked with him previously, so it wasn't like it was a radically different system. But he gave his assistants autonomy at that time, in control. So having said that, so what does DeRuyter bring? What is it different? It's much more of a true three. Now, having said that, it's a true three where the Joker / Jack, whatever name you want to use, linebacker, which is Kayvon Thibodeaux, which was Von Miller, who played for DeRuyter at Texas A&M, is an upright edge rusher. So it's a true three where the one outside backer to the boundary is a rush backer. So it's a different technique, but it ends up being a hybrid anyway. But it just fits the game. And I know Dennis Dodd wrote earlier this offseason, delving a little bit of analytics and trends that with the increase of the spread, and Ohio State is obviously an offense that's seen this. You saw this against Alabama in the national championship game as well. When you're facing those kinds of offenses, whether it be what Alabama did, what Ohio State does, what LSU had done previously and hopes to do again, Georgia, you name it, that if you're going to be playing those teams, statistically, this is strange for Big Ten fans, I'm sure, but two down defensive linemen is actually one of the more common and statistically successful sets now, which is bizarro world to say, but 3 yards in a cloud of dust is kind of dead in the more modern era of things of the RPO world and the spread world and all that kind of stuff. So having said all that, going from a more true four-man front to a closer to three and far more flexible to even two is kind of adjusting with the trend of the sport. But also remember that this is a team who competes in a division with Washington, who is still going to be pro style with a ton of 12 and even 13 personnel. Same thing goes for Stanford, who will never break from that. And an Oregon State team who plays a ton of 12 personnel. So the sport is going one direction, and this Pac-12 North division, other than Wazoo, which they weren't shifting directions exactly. Obviously, they're doing air raid to run and shoot, which is still quite spread. But the division is still set in kind of an old school era. So how do it's competing and needing that multiplicity to compete in a division that is still set in a multi-tight end world. But if you're going to contend with Ohio State, obviously, but should have been last year, but will be this upcoming fall, and Georgia in the next season for Oregon's purposes, how do you implement a defense that can face all those things, that can play a USC air raid or a spread offense from Arizona State potentially in a Pac-12 title game, but has no problem also lining up against 13 personnel against Washington or Stanford, and that could be a difference of 1 week. How do you do that? Not too many other teams, not too many other divisions, not too many other leagues have that, especially now that the triple option has kind of gone away and Paul Johnson's not at Georgia Tech anymore. Not too many teams have that challenge anymore.
Yeah, that is a really interesting thought. I hadn't considered that, but yeah, that is that is a very difficult adjustment in terms of personnel, in terms of scheme, in terms of everything. And the personnel there is like, I think everyone sort of has this vision in their mind of Oregon. It's like, oh, it's Chip Kelly, and they're going to run the blur, and they're going to go for 2 after the first touchdown, and they're not going to play a lick of defense. It's like, well, no, it's a new era there. Mario Cristobal is there. They will own the own that line of scrimmage. They have some really good players. Like this is going to be a pretty good defense this year. And you mentioned Kayvon Thibodeaux. He's someone, I think he is like this year's Penei Sewell, where it's like, I think he's better than people realize, but people maybe remember him as a recruit. Like, he was a very highly ranked 5-star guy, and people, oh yeah, him, I forgot about him. And you haven't thought about him for a couple of years. What does he bring to that defense? Like, and is he, is this going to be one of these things where people are watching TV in September and going, oh, hey, this guy's pretty good. Who is he? Oh, okay, I remember him from a couple of years ago. Is he someone who's is going to kind of jump out to people maybe?
Yeah, I think again for folks, college football fans around the country who weren't as familiar and didn't keep up with it again during last season, and I totally understand it. I get why he may fall off your radar, but he's been a guy who, not only because he was the number 1 recruit in the country a couple of years ago, but and heavily recruited by everybody as a result of that. But I mean, Kuiper's had him as a top 5 guy, I think, pretty much the whole time. He had him that way a year ago. The crazy early projections, out to the 2022 NFL draft had him as a top 5 guy for years. So yeah, he's widely regarded as the number 1 defensive player in the sport entering the season. That he's a 3rd-team All-American, I believe it was last year. He'll probably be preseason first team everybody. Will be a contender for every defensive award you can come up with. And if there's going to be a defensive player who gets mentioned, I'm not saying it'll win. He's not going that'll take ridiculous level of performance, but mentioned in the Heisman conversation, it'll be him, because that's just what he brings to the table. Having said all that, what has he done statistically to back up and warrant a lot of that? Again, last season was a really, really short season. So how do you really compare his statistics fairly for him to the competition and vice versa? It's hard. It's very hard. But if you watch him play, just do it more on the eye test. Like I say, for college football fans in other parts of the country where you're not paying attention every week to an Oregon necessarily, and then you go, oh, wait, they have a top 5 defensive end. I mean, what? Well, all right. Well, remind yourself, watch some film, watch some highlight film, and go, oh, all right, yeah, you can see where this is going. And he's not a guy where you see his best plays, but then his worst plays are way off the radar down. You go, no, he's really good. He's scary good. And then you combine that with a Noah Sewell, who's already taken over as a starting middle linebacker, and Justin Flowe, who basically missed for all intents and purposes all of last season. Might as well have been all of last season. And they were the number 1 and 2 inside linebackers in the country, 2 years ago when they came in as recruits. Those are 3 guys in your front 7. Now, Flo is working in the rotation, to be clear, and Sewell is already starting. But, yeah, they have to replace 2 interior defensive linemen. But like I say, now that they're going to more of a true 3-down set, that how that works exactly may be mitigated slightly. But they've got Thibodeaux on one edge, They've got Mace Foon on the other, who's also played for multiple years now. And they've got a inside linebacker who started for multiple years and is one of the best pass coverage inside linebackers in the country. And then you have a Noah Sewell who tied for the team lead in tackles as a true freshman. So, and like I say, and Flowe is the number 3 guy in that inside group. So they are quite well stocked when it comes to the front 7 at the most critical positions. Yes, does the interior defensive tackles have to be replaced? A couple of guys went on to be undrafted free agents in the NFL. Yeah, that's where they have to fill some spots. But you can't have an embarrassment of riches everywhere. So that's the spots that they have to fill. They don't have to fill their entire starting linebacker core like Ohio State does necessarily. They don't have to go that far, but they do have to fill a couple of spots on the interior of the defensive line. But the edges in the second level, they feel really good, and they should. Like I say, from if nothing more than from a recruiting perspective, you should know that these guys they are definitely highly regarded. I'll say that much. Even if you put zero stock into last season, if you put zero stock into what they've done in the Pac-12 at all, then all right, then put stock into the fact that your favorite team probably recruited them too, because they were 5-star recruits overwhelmingly.
The defensive backfield, they're replacing a couple guys back there. Is that the biggest concern on defense? I mean, this is like offense. It's like you're kind of nitpicking to find like a real true concern on this team.
Yeah, I'd say there's probably, to me, I think the biggest question is actually the interior of the D line because of like I say, because they have to replace multiple guys, and because the performance last year was not necessarily terribly good. They regressed on the run defensive side, and you go, all right, well, if you regressed, and these are the guys who are at the top of the list, and they came back and they didn't quite fulfill the promise they were hoping. They didn't show the pass rush they were hoping, and the guys who were behind them didn't, surpass them entirely. They did a little bit more towards the end of the season. They did, in fairness. But if performance was what it was, and these guys went as undrafted free agents, which, look, not everybody can be drafted. That's okay. And that doesn't mean that they're not going to have successful NFL careers. I hope and wish them the best. But if that is what happened, well, then why should you necessarily feel entering the season that instantly these guys are going to be ready to go, hit the ground running, and deliver better? Well, if they were capable of delivering better, why weren't they capable of delivering better, last December? So that's, to me, because it was an area of regression for them compared to the year before, where I think is the biggest question. But do they have other holes to fill, like you mentioned, the defensive backfield? Obviously, a couple of guys who opted out of the season last year, who they were planning to have, they were planning to replace them all this offseason regardless. They kind of got a little bit of a hurry when Thomas Graham Jr. and Brady Breeze and Javon Holland all opted out of the year. Yeah, three of the 5 guys who they lost this offseason out of the defensive backfield, they already had a kind of a jump on in that sense, good and bad. Having said that, because they've done that, they feel pretty good about the guys who came in and played and started last year. Now, to replace Diamado Lenore on the other side of corner, who really was seldom targeted as a result, because on the other side is a true sophomore who barely played, in the true secondary compared to the year before, so they didn't go after Lenore as much. There's I'd say question insofar as what about the rep count and what does play to play look like for a DJ James who's in position to take over in that spot compared to what he was used to. Did he do well in short samples? Yeah. Does he show a lot of promise? Absolutely. But to go out there and play, if there's a 75 snap game, to go from playing maybe 15 snaps to playing 50, that's a big difference. That's a very big difference. So that's a question for sure. Like I say, in the deep part of the secondary, the safeties, Nick Pickett is a guy who they have to replace. Also an undrafted free agent, ended up getting a minicamp tryout with the Lions. But again, they had kind of worked in multiple guys there. So I think because while on one hand, it certainly hurt them in 2020 not to have the guys who opted out, to be sure. I mean, they got drafted, all of them. So that hurts. to lose 3 draft picks, that hurts. But having said that, in terms of entering 21, do they feel better about a Mykael Wright, a Jamal Hill in particular, who even Thibodeaux said Jamal Hill should have won the Pac-12 championship game MVP. Now, Thibodeaux got it because he put up a couple of tackles for loss earlier in the game, but Hill had the 2 interceptions in the game, the one late to seal it, and he played absolutely terrific down the stretch. Absolutely terrific. And he's going to be the starting nickel again, dynamic playmaker. So you combine him with, like I say, Wright on the one side, DJ James on the other. They feel really good about the guys that they have at the corner and, like I say, nickel spots, and at deep safety of Aaron McKinley III, who's back for what will be his 3rd season as a starter. He started the season opener against Auburn in 19. And again, for fans around the country, I realize you're not watching this team play Cal. I get that. I respect that. But you're not watching them play Cal. You're not watching them play Wazoo. You're going to watch them play Auburn. And you're going to see that Auburn wanted basically a walk-off touchdown. Mm-hmm. Well, in his first game, McKinley was on the opposite end of that. Well, he's like 5'10", and Seth Williams was 6'4" or 6'5". And it was his first game. He's a different player now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He's a very different player now. It's wildly different now. Probably played now over 1,000+ snaps since then, in game, let alone in practice. So that's a player who's been around for several years. Like I say, has ample more game experience now, and is just in a much better position. And you combine him with a Jordan Happel and a Bennett Williams. Bennett Williams, who started his career in Illinois. They've got quite a bit of talent on the 2 deep in the secondary. So while they have spots to replace, like you say, is there a question? Yes. I personally view the biggest question, though, as the interior D line, because of the relative lack of game experience compared to the guys who are coming in the secondary who just got more reps.
And the Ohio State offensive line, the interior of that Ohio State offensive line should be pretty darn good this year. They're replacing a couple guys, but that is definitely a matchup to watch out for. Something else to watch out for. That game is at noon. That is a Fox Big Noon kickoff, and that news was greeted with some griping and complaining from Ohio State fans who wanted a little more tailgate time before one of the biggest games of the season. Mm-hmm. It's also not great for a team coming from Pacific time zone to be playing at 9 a.m. in according to their body clocks. Is that something that has been discussed out there? Is that, obviously the team is going to say, oh, well, we got to deal with it. And we'll, I'm sure they'll practice at 9 a.m. that week or whatever. But, is that a concern out there? Is that something that's being talked about as a challenge for a team to have to get up so early in the morning, when their bodies are saying we should still be sleeping and be out on the football field?
Well, yeah, obviously the announcement came after, we had wrapped up spring and, we haven't taught the players about it just yet, or even coaches for that matter just yet. But going back to the greater issue, fans weren't exactly thrilled about it because, here, let's put it this way. I'm one of the people who, when I heard about 9 a.m. kickoffs, local kickoffs in the Pac-12, I thought, why not give it a whirl? I view it because I understand the TV map. I understand the regionality of the sport. I get that, over 75% of the television viewers are in the Central Eastern time zones. I get how to light up television sets. Pac-12 fans don't want to hear any of that. And Oregon fans only want the kickoff to be noon, 2:30, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock. After that, they don't even want a night game. It has to be basically one of only 2 windows, and that's it. And that goes for a lot of Pac-12 fans, in fairness. Obviously, the world doesn't work that way. So, 9 a.m. Pacific time kick for obviously what will be, the majority of the fan base will obviously be still back in Oregon watching. Yeah, they weren't exactly too thrilled at that, but them's the breaks. The other side of it is, to your point, that the players previously back in 2019, when the idea of 9 a.m. local kicks got mentioned, did some of the players who are since gone, like a Troy Dye is now with the Vikings, or Justin Herbert or others, talk about how they would feel about it. Yeah, but guys who are on the team now, not a ton of them really talked about it at the time. And to your point, also, again, but it's noon local. And because of the time difference, because of the time of year where Oregon's still a quarter school. So I don't know exactly when they're planning to fly to Columbus. I don't know if it'll be Friday morning or if they'll actually go Thursday to better balance things and get more acclimated in that sense. I don't know if it'll be as big an issue necessarily. I really don't. Obviously, it's not ideal, but at the same time, to a certain point, like, I mean, they practice in the morning anyway. They were doing that in the first place. This is a team who practices in the morning. These guys are used to being here early in the practice facility and on campus and whatnot. So I don't, this isn't a team that practices at 3 or 4 in the afternoon and then is making this big adjustment. No, they're in the facility at 6, 7 in the morning and on the field at, somewhere between 8 and 9 each day. So yeah, I don't think it'll be a massive change. That said, is it an issue? Obviously, you'd be a fool to say otherwise. If there's not an issue, then West Coast teams in the NFL wouldn't have the terrible record that they have playing in the Eastern time zone. If it's a non-issue, then some of these factors wouldn't be legitimate statistical factors. It could be a factor. Do I think it's going to be the deciding factor? No. I don't think they're going to win or lose the game on it. But I do think it is obviously something that will be talked about a few times between now and week 2, for sure. Because, a lot of people were hoping for a later kick, whether it be for selfish reasons, tailgate reasons, or anything else. I'm sure a lot of businesses in Columbus were hoping. I'm sure Tommy's Pizza was hoping for a later kick too. But hey, it is what it is.
Yep. They can always go out and hang out and have some pizza after the game. That's all right. That's an option as well. James, let people know where they can find you on Twitter and where they can read your work.
Absolutely. Well, you can follow me on Twitter at James Crepea and read my work at OregonLive.com, where I'm going through the post-spring position breakdown that I do each year. So I'm just about halfway through that. I'm making way into the defense now. So going literally through a lot of this conversation, much more analytically on a position by position, 25 positions deep deal that I do on an annual basis, and lots more than that, though. Obviously, lots of stuff, and as you can imagine, lots of work that we'll be doing for this game, as it's enormous. It's in my opinion, it's not just the biggest game of the season for both teams. It's in terms of national implications. It's the biggest game in college football that week, and I know there's a lot of big games, obviously, in week 2. You mentioned one of them with Washington and Michigan as well, but no, this is it's a massively big game. It's a game that obviously both fan bases were looking forward to this past year, and that I'm sure both fan bases are extremely, extremely jacked up about and excited about for this year. And one of the other issues we didn't even get to, and I'm sure we'll get to closer in, heading into the year, man. How about that? Ohio State opens on the Thursday night at Minnesota, and Oregon's playing on the Saturday. So that 2-day difference, I'm sure, is not going over real well these days over at the Oregon Athletics Complex. Yep. But it's out of their control. So what are you going to do? But that's a factor. So if you want to talk about, all right, well, there's time zone factors, travel factors. How about the factor that Ohio State has 2 more days to prepare for the game? They're coming off a conference road game as opposed to Fresno State. All right, again, we can go back and forth. 70+ days to do this stuff. It's a lot of fun. Yeah,
there's a lot to talk about, and yes, we have plenty of time to do it, but it's getting a little closer. So really appreciate you taking the time to fill us in Oregon, and we'll probably have you on a little when the game's a little closer. We can have a little more specific conversation about the game in general. But James, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom.
All right, and thanks again to James for taking the time to fill us in on Oregon. We will definitely have him on again before the season starts, because that is going to be a monster game for both of those teams. Both of those conferences, there's going to be a lot on the line, and someone is going to have quite a big win for their college football playoff resume after that one. So that is going to be one of the biggest, most anticipated games of the season. There will be lots and lots to talk about. So we will talk to James again a little later on when this game gets a little closer. You can also stay up to date on all of the exciting stuff going on with Ohio State football right now at BuckeyesScoop.com. We will, I'm sure, be talking about that Oregon game and a whole lot of other stuff on our Ask the Insiders board. We have a fantastic team of insiders covering recruiting and the team and X's and O's and just about everything. It's all at BuckeyesScoop.com. You can also find us on all of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, you name it, we're there. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. You can subscribe right there so you never miss an episode. Also, leave us a 5-star rating and review, which will help other folks find those shows. And finally, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. We have a ton of great content up there every day. New podcasts, interviews with players and coaches, camp footage, interviews with recruits. It's all there, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. And all you have to do is hit subscribe, and then you'll get notified every time we drop a new video so you never miss any of that great free content. That'll do it for today. That'll do it for this week. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you on Monday.